Hello everyone and welcome back to the good stuff. We are back at the Capablanca saga, checking up on our good old friend Jose Raul, and well, like I said, we're back at the 1918 tournament of New York. It's round 11, and it's very rare that we can show a photo of Capablanca actually playing a certain game, but here is just such a case. Where we actually do have a photo of this game being played. We already showed it when we started the 1918 tournament of New York, saying that it's a game from round 11. But for those of you who are maybe just joining us, here it is: Capablanca versus Oscar Hayes. Well, Oscar Hayes versus Capablanca. There you have it, Capablanca with the black pieces on board one. Behind them you have Bora Kostic versus Morrison, and in the far back, although you can't see Marshall really, it's Janowski versus Frank James Marshall. So let's just enjoy that for a moment. And then now we're returning to the tournament. Capablanca still without a single loss. Like I said, this is round 11. We're going to be showing two more games from this tournament, and then we're going to check out the standings and, well, see where we go from there. But like we said, probably to Capablanca's match with Borislav Kostic, and then to the World Chess Championship match with Emanuel Lasker. That being said, let's check out this very intriguing game. Hayes opens with e4. We have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, we have knight to c3, and now knight to f6, the four knights defenses on the board, and bishop to b5 by Hayes. We have d6, d4, bishop to d7, now the knight is no longer pinned, and here we have bishop to e3. And now e captures on d4, and it's very interesting, this is only move 6 has been played by Capablanca, and this position has never been reached again. So after this game, this e captures on d4 position has never again occurred anywhere in any tournament. Well, any tournament that notes the moves of the games. But okay, it's not a popular opening anymore, and stronger continuations have been found. But still very interesting. Knight captures on d4, grabbing that pawn, and here just bishop to e7. Capablanca prepares the castle. We have castles by Hayes, castles by Capablanca, and then now h3, just taking away the g4 square from black's knight and bishop, and now knight captures on d4. And here queen captures on d4. If you want to put in the in-between bishop captures on d7, then Capablanca had knight captures on c2 in mind, where you would have to capture, and then after knight recaptures, you would just be down a pawn as white. After knight captures on d4, we have queen captures on d4 as planned, bishop captures on b5, knight captures, and now knight to d7. Now Capablanca has ideas of going to either c5 or e5, or maybe even to b6 and c4 if it will be possible in the future. We have queen to c3 now, and now comes c6, pushing the knight back, knight to d4, and now bishop to f6. Now you don't want your queen to be on this diagonal, so queen to d2. And now finally knight to b6 with ideas of maybe coming to c4. We have c3 by Hayes, allowing this knight to c4 jump, which Capablanca, if he decided to do so, could eliminate black's dark square bishop. But here Capablanca also agrees that the knight is stronger than the bishop here. We have rook to e8, developing while attacking the e4 pawn, and now queen to d3, just defending. With d5, finally a freeing move, and e captures on d5. Queen captures on d5, and now queen to f5. Hayes offers a trade of queens. And here Capablanca declines. He prefers to keep the queens on the board for the moment. If the white queen moves to some unfavorable position, then he can even just continuing, doubling up on the e file, nicely continuing the game. But here Hayes goes queen to f3. He wants to trade queens, and knight to c4 by Capablanca. He says, okay, I'm down with trading queens. I like my position better. And here, if you trade queens, which did happen in the game, we're going to show that. But the other idea is bishop to f4, allowing rook to e4, or maybe just trading and then going about it. But here, black's position is somewhat better. Black does control more space, so you want to remove the queens off the board. So here, queen captures on d5 is played. We have rook captures on d5, and now rook 8 to b1, just defending that b1 pawn. And here, again, Capablanca has to decide how to go about this. He can go rook to e8, continue playing this game. He can decide to go knight captures on e3 and create an isolated e-pawn, but Capablanca decides to go about it differently. Here, okay, if you play knight captures here, f captures, and then rook to e8, for example, then you get rook b to e1, and now the white knight is perfectly fine here. You either have to eliminate it and then fix white's pawn structure, or if you push c5, maybe try to infiltrate knight f3, the knight is controlling the d2 square, you're not infiltrating here, and the white will have d4, d5, e4, e5 very soon. So Capablanca has a different idea. First, bishop captures on d4. Like Capablanca already said, the knight is stronger than the bishop here. We have c captures on d4, the point being that you cannot play bishop captures to keep your pawn structure intact, because knight d2 would attack both rooks and black would win material here. So after bishop captures, we have c captures on d4, and now Capablanca will start his grind. He will play this game against the isolated d pawn. We have rook to e8 first. Rook f to e1, and now f6, just preparing to bring the king into the game. b3, pushing the knight back, knight to a3, and now rook b to c1. King to f7, Capablanca starts bringing the king into the game. Rook e to d1 now, and now rook e to d8. So piling up on the d4 pawn, the idea is knight b5 and winning the pawn. Rook to d2, now you can defend it with either rook c to d1 or even rook to c4, depending on the mood. Knight to b5, attacking the pawn, and now rook to c4. The pawn is defended, but all of white's pieces are now tied down into the defense of the d4 pawn. We have king to e6, Capablanca starts bringing the king deeper into the position, and now g4, not allowing the king to move any closer. So f5 by Capablanca, we have f3, and now just rook to f8. There is no longer need for the moment to keep the pressure on the d file, so Capablanca hopes to open up the f file. With king to g2, Chajes also wants to increase the activity of his king, and now f4. Pushing the bishop further back, we have bishop to f2, and now rook back to d8. And we have a4 now, pushing the knight back. We have knight to c7, so now there aren't three attackers against the d4 pawn. White will also be able to move some of the pieces. With b4 first, now comes a6, and here rook to e2 check. King to d7, and now comes rook to e4, going after the f4 pawn. Capablanca defends it. You can either go rook f8 or g5, as Capablanca did in the game, and now h4. We have h6 and h captures on g5. H captures, and now rook back to c1. Now with ideas of even infiltrating on the 7th rank with rook to h1 followed by rook to h7 check. We have a5 now by Capablanca, hoping that white captures, and then you can just gobble up all of the pawns on the queen side. And here, rook to b1 was played. Bishop to e1 seems to be a little bit better, because now, even if Capablanca captures, then bishop captures will be very strong, because you already control the e7 square, and black doesn't have a move to consolidate. You would have to react to this first. You will not be able to go b5 or rook to a8 or something like that to quickly go for the a4 pawn. So would be an improvement to rook to b1, the move Chajes played, but it's still very much playable. A captures on b4 by Capablanca, rook captures on b4, and now king to c8. Now Capablanca wants to bring his king all the way here and then push b5. We have rook to e2, now comes rook 8 to d7, we have rook to c4, just waiting to see what Capablanca will do, rook 7 to d6 now, and now rook back to b4. We have knight to e6, now again with a triple attack against the d4 pawn, and just rook to e4. Defending. Rook to d2 was also possible. We have king to b8. Now Capablanca starts bringing the king over to the queen side. Rook back to e1. And now comes knight to d8. We have rook back to e2. Now comes rook to d7. Rook to e1, and now king to a7. We have rook to e2. Now comes king to a6. And here just rook to a8. And here rook 7 to d6. And here rook to e7. And now the problem with a move like king to a5, yes, you would very much win the a4 pawn, but you don't really gain anything by it. If king captures, just rook to e2, and how do you prevent checkmate here? You have to go king a3, but then just rook to b2, and you will not be able to escape perpetual. Whatever you play, you're just going to get checked. King moves, again, rook here, threatening mate. Again, you would have to repeat, check, moves, again, threatening mate, and so on and so on. It would be a draw by repetition. So here Capablanca goes b5 as planned. And now, of course, you want captures and captures. This is the plan. But now rook to e2. This rook is now hoping of coming here, and now comes knight to e6, again putting pressure to the d4 pawn. And here the problem with rook a2 is that the king can just move, king to b6, and you don't really gain anything. You will again have to trade here, because if you push a5, then you have a problem. King a6, and you can no longer keep defending the a5 pawn and the d4 pawn. The rook, well, cannot be in both places at once. So you will lose the pawn here and the game. So after knight e6, we have a captures on b5, c captures on b5. Now, well, second part of Capablanca's plan has been completed. Now he does have a passed b pawn. He will now try to push it away with knight d8, knight c6, and start pushing the passed b pawn. Rook to a2 check, we have king to b6, and now comes rook to c2. And here, well, trying to somewhat trick Capablanca. If you capture here, then you lose the game. But, you know, it's maybe not all that obvious, but feel free to pause the video and try to see why you lose the game if you capture this pawn now. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent trapper of knights. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, rook to c4. This pawn is pinned, you cannot capture, and you cannot move the knight because it's pinned, see? So next move, white will just play rook captures here, win a piece, and win the game. So Capablanca obviously not falling for that. We have rook to d7, now comes rook back to c1, and now knight to d8. The knight will be much more active on c6, as it will again attack the d4 pawn, but also support the passed b pawn. Rook to b2, with knight to c6, and now rook c to b1. Rook to a7, Capablanca now also hopes of infiltrating on the queen side. Rook to e1, and now comes rook to a4. Again, a much more active square for the rook. You control much more space while also attacking the d4 pawn. And rook to e6. Chajes finds a nice active move to defend the pawn, as now the knight is pinned. With rook to c4, and now comes rook to f6. Preparing rook to f5, Chajes wants to trade rooks and create a passed f pawn. b4, Capablanca starts pushing his passed pawn, and now rook to f5. And here Capablanca says, no way, just go away, knight to e7, or you can capture and then we're going to trade here, no passed pawn for you. Rook to f7, and now knight back to c8. And here rook to f8, attacking the knight. Also, instead of this, you could have just gone back, rook to f5, but Chajes also interested in beating Capablanca. He doesn't just want to draw, as he already defeated him. We've shown the game in the Rice tournament, in the Rice Memorial Tournament of New York 2 years ago, the only game Capablanca lost after Capablanca started his legendary streak. But Chajes already showed that he can defeat Capablanca, and he wants to do it again. We have king to b5, and now comes rook back to f6. Rook to c1, rook to c1, and now rook to f5, again going for a trade, and knight back to b6, saying, okay, we can trade, but we're trading on d5. Rook back to f7, and now comes knight to d7. Rook back to f5, and now, well, it's a little bit different. It's no longer the same position as when the knight was on b6 and this rook wasn't on c1, but here it just doesn't work for white anymore. Here, Capablanca just played captures on f5, and here we have g captures on f5. Yes, now white does have a passed pawn, but Capablanca's plan is clear. We have knight to f6, the king is now coming all the way here, and you will start pushing your passed pawn, so white has to react to this. First, rook to e2, but now just b3. We have rook to e7, now with ideas that if pawn is pushed to b2, you can play rook b7 check and win the pawn, but rook to c2, now the pawn on b2 will be protected. Rook to b7 check, king to c4, rook to c7 check, king to d3 now, and rook to b7. We have b2 by Capablanca, and now comes rook to b4. Waiting to see what Capablanca will do. We have knight to d5, and here f6 by Chajes, saying, okay, if you capture my rook, I'm getting a queen here, but Capablanca says, I'm not interested in your pawn or your rook, I'm going for mate. Knight to e3 check. The bishop is pinned, so you cannot capture. We have king to h3, and now rook captures on f2. Capablanca doesn't care about the passed pawn anymore. Chajes pushes f7, and here just rook captures on f3 with check. King to h2, we have rook to f2 check, king to g1, and here it really all just falls apart for Oscar Chajes. Feel free to pause the video here and try to find the mating sequence. I'll give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent checkmater in 6. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, the move is of course rook to f1 check. King to h2, and now just g4. The plan is pawn to g3 and rook to h1 mate. For example, if you bring a queen into the game, g3 check, king h3, and rook to h1 mate. But this is not the best defensive line for white. So even with the best defense after g4, you can go rook to b3 check, and now after the king moves, you can play rook captures knight. But it's still the same. Rook f2 check, king g1, and now pawn captures rook. And now you no longer care what white plays. You even control the f8 square, but it's really not that important. Whatever white plays, you can bring a queen into the game. Now just pawn to b1, you can bring a queen or a rook. It's mate, and of course that's all that's needed. So after king to g1, Chajes resigned, and yet another brilliant victory for Jose Raul Capablanca, who is still dominating this tournament without a single loss and just doing what he does best. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Joseph Bassett, Sven Van Hoek, Dan O'Hanlon, Haydar Kadim, and Ryan Sims for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. We're continuing the Capablanca saga. Like we mentioned, 2 more games in this tournament, then a match with Bora Kostic, and then we're continuing the World Chess Championship match against Emmanuel Lasker. So once again, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you soon. Have an excellent rest of your day.